Okay, let's see. I can still see people are still signing in, but it is right at 7, so I'm going to go ahead and get started. So good evening, everyone. Before we get started with the presentation, I wanted to let you know that today's session is being recorded. If you'd like to revisit any of the material later or share it with a friend or colleague, I'll be following up afterward with the recording. Also, throughout the presentation, you are welcome to type any questions into the questions box. We will be collecting them and I'll read them out loud at the end of the presentation. So without further ado, thank you for joining us today for today's Hot Topic in Healthcare session, Design Basics, Balance Type and Image. Whether you're creating brochures, patient education materials, or internal communication, the way we present information visually can have a huge impact. And yet, for many healthcare, graphic design can feel like a foreign language. The session is specifically for non-designers working in healthcare roles, and together we'll explore the fundamentals of good design, principles like alignment, contrast, proximity, and visual hierarchy, and learn how they can dramatically improve the clarity and impact of your materials. By the end of the session, you'll walk away with practical tools, real-world examples, and new confidence in applying these techniques to your own projects. And we're incredibly fortunate to be guided today by an expert in this space. Please join me in welcoming our guest, Elisa Watson.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for having me. And while I'm doing the presenting, I'm going to turn my video off just for lag time issues. But I'm excited to walk through design basics for healthcare professionals, communicate with clarity and impact. So I'll go ahead and get started. There we go. Okay. Well, if you didn't catch me in the first of this series, I just want to say hi again, and that I am a professional with 20+ years of graphic design and marketing experience. And I also happen to have had 5 years of healthcare corporate marketing department work with MedStar Health, which is a large healthcare conglomerate on the East Coast. And 10 years of working in partnership with a variety of nonprofits, including some that provide health and health services. And I recently, I guess not recently, but last year, a year and a half ago, launched Sunnyside Creative Agency with a business partner. And so we are almost 2 years in. Okay, so poor design, poor communication, right? Good design helps people process information more easily, it builds trust and encourages action. And that's sort of what we talked about in that first session, which I know was recorded. So if you didn't get a chance to see that one, please feel free to go back and listen to that one as well. I'm clicking, but it's not, oh, there we go. Oh, I went too far. I don't know how to go back. I'm so sorry. Carrie, can you go back?
I can help you. It's
okay. Can you
no
go back?
Worries.
I think there's a delay in like my clicking and it going, and I got too click happy. So if we could go back to the one right after the.
Oh.
Sorry, everybody.
No worries. Just let me, is this where you want it to be?
Can we go back? Oh, wait 1 second, there we go. All right. And I'm going to click once and we're going to wait for it to change. And I'm going to make sure that I'm not doing it wrong.
Because I'm technically, there is a couple second lag just technically sharing my screen, so.
Gotcha. Okay.
You're unable to move it, just let me know and I can take control.
Yeah, it looks like it won't move for me. So if we could go to the next slide. Sorry about that. Okay, so here's the challenge, right? We're non-designers, you weren't trained in visual design, and you have limited time, budget, and tools, right? So, but you can still create clean, readable, and effective materials by learning a few core design principles. So we're going to go over those right now. So we've got alignment, contrast, repetition, proximity, white space, and visual hierarchy. So now we're going to talk about each one of these, and we're also going to see examples of good and bad versions. So first we'll talk about alignment. And this is that moment where everything should have a visual connection. So how do you create alignment? You want to avoid random placement, right? We don't want to just like stick things everywhere. And you want to use left or center alignment consistently. So if you're going, now I want to caveat that, yes, there is also right alignment for text, type, graphics, all of that. It's pretty rare that you would use that for large bodies of text, so I sort of avoided that. But again, using left or centered alignment consistently is all a part of creating better alignment within a piece. Okay, so now we're going to see an example. And so here's clear alignment, right? On the left, we have a left justified title, subhead, and then the copy. To the right of that, we have the like graphic or picture, and everything falls within this nice, beautiful little alignment grid. And you can't see that I'm moving my hands around, but I am. All right, and then on the right, we have poor alignment, right? The title is smaller than the subhead, the stuff is just kind of laid out there, and it's very busy. So again, clear alignment will help with design, with good design, and poor alignment is not going to be beneficial for anyone looking at that piece. All right, so then we have contrast. And contrast is important because it creates visual interest, it guides the eye, and it helps people know where to look first. So how do you create contrast? You're using contrasting colors and complementary colors. And then you also can utilize contrast within fonts and use fonts in different sizes and weights, and especially use different fonts in sizes and weights to emphasize key information. So in that last slide, you saw titles nice and big and heavy, subtitles medium and not quite as large, and then you have that body of text. But for contrast, let's also take a look at our example, because it's also about color, right? So contrast on this example is shown in two ways, both with color and with the actual type. So with color on your left, the title is the largest thing, the heading, and then the subhead. They all make sense and work together. And knocked out in white on the purple, you can actually read it. And probably, depending on how everybody's screens are calibrated, you may even not be able to see the words in the orange box at all. So this is poor contrast. You can't see the title, heading, or subhead, and they are flipped. So you're looking at title being the smallest, thinnest type, where heading is then the middle or the medium type, and subhead is the largest. So that's an unbalanced contrast when you're thinking about what's the most important thing do I want people to read first. We want people to read that title, then the heading, then the subhead. And on to the next, we have repetition, which is a strange, I think sometimes people think repetition is a strange thing that's important. They're like, what, repetition? But it is, because visual elements, when you repeat visual elements to create, you create cohesion, right? It helps build recognition, and it also looks really professional. So using the same font but in different weights and sizes, using the same colors or complementary colors, and in various hues or transparencies, as well as consistency and repetition in icons, right? So, and then shapes within graphics and images. So let's look at that example. I think this is the best way to learn about it, right? So repetition. On the left, we have one font used in 3 different weights and in 3 different sizes. We have the title pulled out in a circle, and then we have what would usually be either a graphic or an image in a circle as well, and an underline for the subhead. On the right, we have poor repetition. We've got circles and rectangles and a nice serif and a sans serif, and then we have this crazy scripty font, right? And then we have a different script font. And then we have two different colors that don't necessarily work well together. And so this creates confusion and will not be as obviously as readable as something with clear repetition. All right, and on to the next. So then we have proximity. And this is grouping related items together. So you utilize proximity to avoid clutter and then you also want to keep content concise. So words, images, icons, and by using proximity in the right way, you also improve scannability. So we'll look at that example. Okay, so clear proximity on the left, poor proximity on the right. Think about it this way. One of the things that I like to think about when I'm talking about proximity especially is if you have key terms, right? So I work with a nonprofit that provides legal information and helps people from getting evicted. And key terms are vital because legal jargon can be very difficult for people to understand. And so we have a key terms section of the flyer that we just produced on the right. And all the key terms are together. If we're looking at the graphic in front of us and you imagine that the purple dots on the right in the orange box are the key terms and the rest of the content is the information, you don't know where to look, you don't know where to start, and it doesn't really make any sense. So that's that clear proximity, like that's that grouping of things together that makes sense. So keep your key terms together. Maybe you have, bullet points, things like that. Okay, on to the next. White space. I have a feeling even non-designers knew this was going to come up, right? Please don't fear empty space. Space gives content breathing room. Crowded designs are overwhelming and reduce comprehension. This is that moment where more isn't always better, it's just more, right? So my cute little graphic for that shows you that clear use of white space, right? It's like, this purple dot can breathe. But this orange dot is like coming at us and feels uncomfortable is a great word for it. So that's white space. And then hierarchy, which is vital, right? So hierarchy guides the eye from the most important to the least important thing on the page, on the project, on the billboard, on anything that you can think of, right? Anything that is designed. So using hierarchy, size and weight within fonts, size for images and graphics, the placement of things, as well as, so placement is like the order. I probably should have said order instead of placement, but it does matter. And then one clear call to action. All right, and we'll see that example. Right, so we have like our clear use, right? We've got like our title and our subhead. We know exactly what to look at first. We know exactly what to look at second. And then if you go back and look at those dots, great. On the right, with our poor use of white space, we have this really big dot and the title is smaller and subhead is too big and they're not balanced at all because there's no visual organization. They just kind of look plopped on there, which again, all ties back to some of the other tools. All right. All right. So all of these are great things to know about, but how do you implement them in health communication, right? So how are you designing with health in mind, with health communication in mind? So we want to design for clarity and accessibility, right? So we're going to use plain language, try to avoid industry jargon if you can, or create key terms. Again, this is all based on who your audience is. So think about who is going to be reading this. And a reminder that the majority of Americans read at a 4th to 6th grade reading level. High contrast for readability. Use clean, readable fonts. Please avoid those decorative fonts. Sometimes they just don't work, right? In short, tiny bits maybe. Or for specific events like wedding invitations. All right, so, and then ADA friendly, right? So we want to consider colorblind safe palettes as well as reviewing readable font sizes. So if you know that your audience is older, you'd like to, you want to make sure that your fonts are a little bit larger. If you are, you know that your audience is potentially colorblind, you want to make sure that you're using color safe font palettes. All right, and next. The other thing to think about is considering cultural sensitivity. So you want to use images and icons that reflect the audience and community. That should be pretty straightforward, but I say these things anyway. Avoid stereotypes and make sure that the visuals support and don't distract from the message. So whatever your message is, whatever your call to action is, make sure that you're not utilizing images or icons that will pull or distract away from that call to action and message. All right. All right. And then this is like a little tiny design tips cheat sheet, right? Keep it simple. Use 1 to 2 fonts and then align and group things logically. Don't overcrowd and avoid using blocks of long text unless you're writing a book, and then that makes sense. All right. All right, so I have a couple of examples, and I think it's important to be able to see all of these tools in action, right? So it's great to have the little graphics, but it's also nice to be able to see it in action. On your left, we have the before for this is actually an email newsletter. One of the problems was the click-through rate, the open rate. People just didn't seem to be excited to read this. So on the left, you can see in the little before, there's a lot of links that are long links that are structured, which is like a bunch of letters and words that are all underlined, right? It's a little bit much. There isn't as much visual interest with graphics and images that connect that information. And then the buttons they run across the entire screen basically. So those big purple blocks are actually buttons, even though they look like dividers. It's a little much, right? So on the right, we have in the middle and on the right, we have the after, right? So we've included visual interest with images. We have balance between the hierarchy. So even though we broke this out into sections and we have featured work is smaller than the title of that featured work and also is in a different color. They really love their teal, purple, and orange, so we really embrace that. And then you can see we have clear direction to read more instead of these really, really, really big buttons or long, long links. All right, and then the next example slide. Okay, again, this is like groupings of, this is examples of how designs work together, right? So the Gunpowder Valley Conservancy does a Explore the Gunpowder Watershed challenge every year. We have consistent type. This is one of those moments where a script actually worked, right? Because we're only using it for small bits of type. Greetings from the gunpowder, and then trails, landmarks, and nature await, right? So again, short, small, and not the most important thing. What you read first off is gunpowder, and then we read Explore the Gunpowder. They did t-shirts for 2025, which was really fun. The Wilmer Eye Institute celebrates its centennial this year of 2025. They just had their big gala, but they also want to celebrate all year long. So this is a variety of items that were created for them, including some digital ads. They updated their letterhead. We have a print ad there, and they even, of course, created a logo for the celebration. So you can see how everything is cohesive, works together. It still looks like them, but it clearly has a thought all in of its own about around the centennial. All right, those are just some examples. And then I just wanted to remind everybody that you don't have to be a graphic designer to create clear, more effective materials. Just keep in mind clarity, audience clarity, and consistency. And then I also wanted to mention that there are moments in time, and this is right before the Q&A, but there are also moments in time when you want to reach out to a professional, right? Like this slideshow is great, and they're really good tools to work with, but they're not going to make you an expert. There are professional experts. So, for example, if you or your team are doing an annual report, creating a series of flyers, even if you're doing dissertation graphics, I've worked on dissertation graphics before even, right? If you're doing a PSA or advertising campaign, and that could be cross-platform. Maybe you're doing something with digital ads, billboards, you wanna send emails, and you wanna do some sort of direct mail campaign, right? That cross-platform campaign is a great time to reach out to a professional. Branding is another good reason, large installations or signage. So keep in mind that there are professionals out there that are more than willing to work with a budget and also are just a really good resource for those moments in time so that you aren't spending more time than you would need to, and you can have something that is professionally created. But these tools will definitely help for all the materials that you do need to create or that your team needs to create sort of on the fly and when there's no budget, right? All right. Any questions?
There were some that trickled in kind of during the presentation, so I'll go ahead and read them out to you, Elisa, if that's okay.
Awesome. Absolutely.
Let's see. So the first one I'm seeing is when working with limited time and resources, what's the one design principle you recommend focusing on first to make the biggest impact?
Ooh, that's a really good question. I love that question. If I had one, if I were only ever allowed to use one principle, I would I would probably stick with alignment. And I say that because when you use alignment, the other principles, except for contrast, will work themselves. Actually, if we went back to that graphic, which is, I think, slide 8, you can
I
almost
can go back.
see,
Let's see.
yeah, if you don't mind, you can almost see the
Yeah.
use of white space, the use of hierarchy, and all of those, almost all of the other principles are there for you to see. So while some people might say contrast or hierarchy, again, utilizing alignment will help you with that. So aligning everything properly. There we go. That's the one. Oh no, that's repetition. I'm so sorry. Some of them look so similar to me that.
So that's contrast. Sorry if I'm, oh, here's alignment. Sorry if I'm making you dizzy. This is,
No.
is this the one you
Yep, this
were
is it. So you can,
looking for? Or,
yep, this is perfect. So you can see on the left where
okay.
there's clear alignment, there's also clear hierarchy. There's also good use of white space. There's use of proximity where you have the title, the subhead, you have that text together, right? It makes sense to have the image and maybe there's a small caption in that other little circle. You're using alignment and alignment will really help make sense. One of the things I love to work with is a grid. So there's a grid there. If no one can see it, that's okay. But I use grids a lot, and that really helps with alignment. Something else I'll say is that there are some really great tools out there to help with design for non-designers. We did talk about Canva last time. Canva, again, is another great option. So there are great templates in there, and that also will help, right? So utilizing a tool for non-designers that have some design templates and tricks already kind of built in are also really helpful. But if you're working from scratch, I would start with alignment. And that'll lead you down the road to the rest of it, to the white space, to the hierarchy, to the, to the proximity, all of that. I hope that's helpful.
Great. And that could not have been that was very helpful. Thank you. That could not have been a better segue to the next question. So many of us rely on templates.
Yeah.
What are some common mistakes you see people make when customizing them, and how can we avoid those pitfalls?
Oof. Okay. So templates in the design world ranges a whole slew of things. So what I'm going to focus on, just for clarity's sake, is I'm going to talk about templates for social media. Maybe that's not as relevant. How about PowerPoint templates? Does that help? I would say
Sure.
for PowerPoint, people go overboard with too many different options. So when you create those master slides and you're like, oh, it'll look so great if I create 15 different layouts for me to work with and 15 different, with different color sets and back and forth. Keep it simple, right? That first cheat sheet rule, keep it simple. So the most the information that you want people to focus on, make sure that that is the most important thing on the page. That's across the board, right? If you're looking at something, you don't know where your eye should go, you don't know what you should read next, you feel like things are cluttered, that's honestly probably my biggest thing. The two biggest mistakes are clutter and too much copy. Now, of course, this is all relative to like what you're working on, but I am an over talker and I tend to be an over writer as well. So it's good for me as a professional to, I reach out to my proofreaders and my writers so that I'm like, hey, can you make this sound better? And can you make it more concise? Because people's attention spans are short. And so if it isn't something that someone has to sit down and read, they might not. And so what is the most pertinent, most important information? Make sure that it's as short and sweet as possible. But yeah, so avoid those pitfalls.
Great. And thank you. And then the last question I'm seeing come through, and you did touch on this during the presentation, but maybe they mean in a broader sense. But do you have any quick tips for making sure our materials are accessible to patients of different ages, reading levels, and visual abilities?
Absolutely. So you can color contrast test. If you're working with something digital and you're not going to print it out, there are online color contrast testing that test for the AA and the AAA compliance. So one of my favorite is Coolors, which sounds funny, but it is literally COOLORS.co, and they have a great color contrast test for digital colors, and that'll work really even if you're working in Word, you can test your contrast that way for colors wise, right? So readability, it ranges. Compliance changes, and so you have to be careful. I have worked in 508 compliance before where we knew the government would be reviewing for compliance, and so everything has to be 16-point font or larger. That's just the reality of that compliance level. So again, a lot of it has to do with who your audience is and if it's going to be reviewed. So I would say, who is your audience? Make sure that, again, if you're designing for older eyes, that you are thinking about that and making everything a little bit bigger, right? So try to stay with, it also depends on, unfortunately, the font that you're using. I think back in the day, people loved to use Comic Sans on papers because the letter forms are really big, and so they take up a lot of space, and the spacing is really big, and so it takes up a lot of space. But now you want to just be thoughtful about, if you're using Arial, which everyone has across the board on their computers, no matter whether you're working on a Mac or a PC, that's a really great sans serif that has a pretty standard sizing. And so that's a great great place to start, I would say, and utilizing 14 point or above, again, depending on the audience. So older eyes, 14 or above. If you know, average eyes, you could go down to 9 point. Now, you know, this, I could talk about this all day. You could go to business cards where, you know, some people put 7-point type or 6-point type on their business cards. That's a whole different ball game because you're working with such a small amount of space. So it's also relative to the project that you're working on. I know that doesn't give you a specific answer, but I hope it's also helpful, right? Because it does shift and change depending on the project.
Absolutely. Thank you so
Okay, so
much,
color
Elisa.
contrast, type
Mhm.
size. Did I miss anything?
I don't think so.
Oh, you know what? Oh, I also want to point out if you have Adobe Acrobat Pro, there is an accessibility checker for documents, which is really helpful. Again, I work with nonprofits. I actually work with BISM, which is it's a service, it's a nonprofit that provides services to people with all levels of blindness. And there's a production house, there's teaching, there's cooking. I mean, it's amazing. They are amazing. And I have learned so much about compliance for screen readers, compliance for readability for documents. Now, I also worked with Tri-Service Nursing. That's when I had to do 508 compliance, and that is a whole different ballgame. But all that to say that if you have Acrobat Pro, and it may even be an option in the free version of Acrobat, but I don't know because I have the Pro version. Acrobat Pro has an accessibility checker, and that will give you a report about what the problems are with that document. That goes into a little bit about what we're going to talk about in the third segment, which is about it's actually about accessibility and audiences. So I think it's a great segue. So please, anybody who's interested in learning more about accessibility and audiences for healthcare design, come back to our third session, which I don't know exactly when will be, but will be sometime, I think, in November, October or November.
Yes, absolutely. And I will be reaching out with all of that information as well. And then, you know, once the third part of the series, once we have a complete series, I will also compile all of it together so that we'll have a little bank to kind of show them from beginning to finish. So thank you so much, Elisa. This was extremely informative and just so well done. So we really appreciate your time this evening.
Oh, thank you all so much for joining. I appreciate it. And please feel free to reach out with any questions. I really am happy to talk about design all day.
Of course, absolutely. And as I said, I will be following up with our information and with Elisa's information. But this session was put on by, you know, Bay Path University graduate admissions. This is our contact information, just in case you are interested in any of our healthcare or any other of our programs. This is our email, a phone number to reach us with. We are always happy to chat. So again, thank you for attending with us this evening. I will be following up with this shortly, and I hope you all have a lovely evening.
Thank you.
Thank you.